All right, so we'll do part two of the lecture on early childhood. Now we're talking about some of the social and emotional issues or kind of milestones in preschool years. Again, preschool is when kids are learning, doing a whole bunch of really critical socialization about how to be in interactions, how to be in the world socially. Um, so, one of the things that kids are getting better with across preschool is self regulation. So, self regulation is not just controlling their emotional expression or verbal expression, but also the goal here is to adjust your arousal, your emotional arousal state to what is comfortable. So, not allowing yourself to be too upset, not allowing yourself to be to be too engaged in emotions that are not um, as socially uh, easy to deal with. And those allowable kinds of social expressions or emotional expressions or social expressions are going to vary across communities. And what our strategies are for controlling them will also vary across communities. Um, there's a lot of supportive one-on-one instruction given to this. Kids may use words and may repeat things that parents have said to them. Um, we do a lot of kind of modeling, but also kind of supporting kids in doing this emotional self-regulation in this age group. Um, Before preschool, we are starting to get good at this. Babies will suck on their fingers or a pacifier or rock themselves back and forth to kind of calm themselves. Um, Starting in preschool, kids start trying to reduce emotionally charged stimuli. They will turn away from things, put their hands over their ears if things are too loud or too scary. Um, as I said, they will use language. So kids may say, well, mommy will be right back. She said she'll be right back. They may encourage themselves using language. And they will also use active engagement, so purposefully switching their focus of attention to something else. I have a niece that got started doing some art project the other day, and I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Oh, I'm just spending time because I was having trouble waiting for my turn to use the other toy." So she was having trouble waiting. And so she realized she was having trouble. And so she got engaged with something else, active engagement to regulate her own emotions. Well done. We also see in preschool that kids start to have a self concept. So, a self concept is a broader term than identity. It's also a little bit less specific, less complex than identity when we're talking about it for preschool kids, but they are starting to understand how they conceive themselves. This conception of themselves tends to have some of the more superficial, but also kind of less flexible binary kind of extreme um, characteristics of some of their other thought at this age. So they will describe themselves in terms of observable characteristics. I am the girl with the yellow hair. Typical emotions or attitudes, sometimes possessions, but rarely reference to internal traits. Like we're not often saying I am uh, a generous person or I am a outgoing person. Right? Um, Along with this concept of self concept at this age, kids are also starting to get an idea about gender, and in early elementary school years as well as in preschool years, kids' ideas about gender and other social categories may be very, again, very concrete, very strict, not very flexible, not very dynamic. An example would be a story that was told to me of the child of a psychologist who actually studies gender development about her son, Jeremy. So her son, Jeremy, was watching his mom get ready for work and noticed that she was putting a barrette in her hair, and he asked to wear a barrette to school. So she let him borrow one of her Brett's and wear her Brett to school. When he was at school, she's told this later by the teacher, her son's teacher. Um, he was approached by other children, and one of the other kids said, "Oh, you are a girl. Only girls wear Brett's. You have a Brett on, so you are a girl." And Jeremy said, "No, I'm not a girl. I'm wearing a Brett, but I'm not a girl." And the other kid said, "No, only girls wear Brett's, and you have a Brett, therefore you are a girl." And Jeremy dropped his pants and said, "No, I am a boy. I have a penis. Anyone can wear barrettes." So, and which is not socially acceptable behavior in preschool, and we're trying to teach socially acceptable behavior. So this is why the mom knew about it. Gotta call home. So this idea of only girls wear barrettes is very, very typical of preschool, early elementary school years, that we have very concrete, very non-flexible ideas about social categories. So just to be specific here, in terms of talking about sex and gender, when we talk about sex, we're talking about biological aspects, generally speaking, of being male or female. There's a lot that we could go into here, and this is not as cut and dry as one might expect. That it is not necessarily as binary as one might expect. Gender has historically been conceived of as binary in the Western world, has not always been conceived of as binary in other cultures. And gender is acquired behavioral psychological aspects of related to sex, of being male or female. So we have gender roles, how you're supposed to behave and how this is valued by society, but also gender identity, so how you understand yourself as gendered. The other thing to say here is that this is not merely a nature-nurture issue, because nurture is somewhat in play for how we express our both our gender, but nature is as well. And people have argued that your assigned membership in a sex of being male or female may act as a social cue to figure out which behaviors I'm supposed to be learning about, or who I'm supposed to be learning from about how to be in this social category. Okay, so Kohlberg's stages of gender developments. We talk about, Kohlberg was talking about how kids move from an amorphous idea of who they are gender-wise to who they are, to what this gender means about them. So initially, the first stage would be gender labeling. I can understand the gender labels that are important in my community and use them to label myself and others. The next one is gender stability. So this is the idea that I understand that who I am, what my gender now is going to stick with me as I move across life. Little girls grow up to be women, little boys grow up to be men, kind of thing. And then gender constancy. This is an interesting kind of trajectory, but people have established this with multiple research studies, finding that the stability precedes constancy, and constancy is where gender doesn't change based on what I look like, right? So little girls grow up to be men, but if you wear a tie, you might become a man. Or little girls grow up to be women, and then if you wear a tie, you might become a man. And then finally, gender identity complete, and that is when you have both stability and constancy and the ability to use the labels that are important in your community. Lots of different ways of explaining gender development. Some people have argued that this is mostly about biology and hormones. This breaks down a bit when we're talking about gender development in gender identity development in preschool, because uh, hormonally speaking, kids are not very differentiated across genders at this point. Um, there are there's psychoanalytic explanations for how we develop gender, but also social learning theory. So we are imitating, but also that what we are imitating is differentially reinforced. I also wanted to share gender schema theories. So gender schema theory is a mental model that talks to us about, or the idea that kids build a mental model of what it means to be male and what it means to be female, and that we acquire new knowledge that fits with that, right? So if I have decided I am male, I'm going to watch the men in my life, watch the folks that I identify as men on the TV, and be trying to learn and trying to attend most to what they are doing, right? Because those guys are the ones who are telling me how to be me, right? We can also learn through socialization, either by directly being told what to do and what not to do. You guys may remember me getting messages directly or otherwise about what it meant to be a member of your gender category. But also there's a lot of observational learning. Okay, so an old but pretty typical kind of paradigm for a study for gender schemas, and this is really focusing on the idea that kids have an internal kind of model or definition that they're working with, which Piaget called schema. So in schema about what gender is. And in this study, a girl is given 4 objects to play with. Only 2 of these are specifically gendered, and the other 2 are specifically chosen to not be as interesting to play with. So one is a toy, one is a doll. Those are the 2 gendered one. One is an orange and one is an artichoke. I think they did this study in California because we grow both of those things. Anyway, so kid is put into this context given these 4 options of what do you want to play with, and the kid will choose the object that is gender typed to match how they identify, right? I am the girl. I will take the doll. Um, and so the kid plays more with the doll that's relevant to them. It's the first part of the study. And then they invite the child back at a later point and give the child the same, or talk to the child about the toys that they had to choose from and what they played with the other day. So the idea here is that if I choose to play with the doll, I'm going to remember the doll. If I have not chosen to play with the truck, I won't remember the truck. And this makes sense, right? If you played with it, spent time with this object, you're more likely to remember it. Duh. But the larger theory here is that if we're going through our entire life, our entire world, and typing things as, for me, not for me, for me, not for me, right? And avoiding or forgetting the things that we're choosing as not for us, right? Then we are building a schema, an idea of what we are that is kind of self-perpetuating, right? I am about these things that I remember and have studied. I am good at these things because of who I am. This is part of what it means to be an appropriate female, is knowing these things and doing well at these things. On the other hand, it's all I've attended to. I haven't attended to other things because I have chosen not to, because those are not for me. Okay, so a little bit on aggression, just as this is another aspect of social and emotional development that we're working with in preschool. So some people have talked about aggression as instinctual and as adaptive. So we have the need to express aggression, the idea that we can, of catharsis, where we can get it out of our system, that something can happen and you can be relieved of that aggression, so you have it like pent up and then you need to release in some way. The other issue with Freud, and we'll talk about this a little bit later with Bandura, is the idea that you could watch somebody else be aggressive and that that would dispel the pent up aggression in yourself. Another theory of aggression is social learning theory, very common. Um, Bandura was one of the first big guys for this one, and this one basically is describing aggression as a social behavior. So we acquire it through modeling as well as direct experience. Um, Social learning theory on aggression talks about aggression as instrumental to goals, so it gets things done that it may be a good tool. It can be useful to stop others. There are ways in which it is socially sanctioned. There are ways in which it is okay in some spaces. And it's also maybe intrinsically rewarding. It feels good to punch something sometimes, maybe. And Bender also talks about proactive versus reactive aggression, both in terms of the sanctions that we put on that socially, but also what might be motivation to engage in that different kinds of aggression. So when we're talking about preschool kids, we see a transition in preschool from two different types of aggression. We move from instrumental aggression through a preschool, we start to include and do more of hostile aggression. So instrumental aggression is aggression directed at obtaining something. So you have the toy that I want. If I just bite your hand, then you will drop the toy and then I will get the toy, right? Hostile aggression requires a little bit more social manipulation and understanding of people. So that whole theory of mind thing, you've got to understand what is important to other people in order to use hostile aggression. The goal for hostile aggression is not merely to get an object, get access to a toy, as an instrumental aggression, but it is more to establish one's place in a hierarchy, right? So this is more about relationship and about power than about I want that thing. So we start showing instrumental aggression even within the first year of life. By 2 years old, we can negotiate and share to avoid a fight. We start to see a increase in instrumental aggression first, particularly as kids are starting to see themselves as separate from the rest of the world. And right around age 2, we start to see people understand ownership rights. No, that's mine. Mine is a favorite word of a lot of 2-year-olds. Already by age 2, we are starting to see differences across genders in terms of physical versus relational aggression and how each is used. And this is probably because of socialization and what is allowed or kind of reinforced. So we can see physical aggression in that red line and teasing in the green line. So teasing will increase dramatically in that first couple years. Again, teasing requires understanding people, it requires understanding at least what people want to be and what they don't want to be in order to tease them well. Okay, so again, some aspects of aggression. Aggression is maintained because it is rewarded. We often give, if nothing else, attention to people who are aggressive. Also, we may get our way. Victims may retreat. Kids are often imitating models of aggression they see in their lives. We have a lot of models of aggression available for kids. Even in kids media, there is a lot of aggression. When we show kids adult aggression, as in the Bobo doll study, they tend to engage in more aggression. This effect doesn't last very long, but given the amount of models of aggression in our world, people have argued that it still matters, even though the effect is not so long lasting. This is the Bobo doll study. I will attach a video here for you to look at to show you some correlates for aggression. And some of these are problematic, but I want to just throw that out there. Again, remembering that correlation is not causation here. So there are some genetic correlates for aggression. In extreme cases of highly aggressive individuals, they often have more testosterone and less serotonin. In kids that are more aggressive, particularly in kids, but in teens, but this is with adults as well, they may have different ways of cognitively processing what's going on in their worlds. So the idea here is that kids are interpreting things in ways that foster more aggressive responses. Oh, you meant to step on my toe, as opposed to, it's probably a mistake. They were, I didn't know I was there, whatever. Assuming that the world is out to get you in a way. It's very we're against each other, we're fighting assumption there. And the last one is there are environmental aspects of that are correlated to aggression. Some people have talked about poverty or oppression, particularly in cases of relative deprivation, where you have significantly less than others, and you can see that difference. Have talked about this as a subtle aggression done against kids and families. So it's that would make any aggression that those kids show reactive to that initial injustice, as opposed to as initiating aggression. So again, some of these are correlated, not causal, but these are some of the correlates of aggression. Should also talk, and this is related to perhaps how aggression may play out in families, that kids often demonstrate aggression once in ways that are safe for them. And so what do I mean by that? People tend to express their aggression most often in ways that are safe within their social hierarchy. So the underling is not going to take on the top dog because it's not safe to do so. They might get seriously injured or thrown out of the pack. So a kid is less likely to be aggressive against a abusive or physically aggressive parent than they are against a younger sibling or the family pet, just because they're expressing aggression in a more viable, safer way. Okay, so what do we know about controlling aggression? We are more able to control aggression when the kid is identifying with the person who's telling them not to be aggressive and who is administering punishment. When that punishment is administered consistently. We know that physical punishment and physical threats increase aggressiveness, don't decrease it. And that it may help children to become aware of the feelings of others. So working with them on that theory of mind, working with them on the executive function, so pausing in what I'm going to do to consider somebody else's theory of mind, where somebody else is thinking or feeling, is good. All right, so that's where we're going to stop for this week. And I look forward to seeing you on Zoom or on the discussion board.